Very warm welcome to the farewell lecture of Mr. Klaus Dörre, What's Left. With my colleague Johannes Zitte, I will be moderating this event today. We are the co-workers in the Research Institute of Mr. Dörre, and we are extremely delighted to see such a great number of people here from every corner, from every context. Very warm welcome to you all. Today, we are having a little bit of an untypical farewell event. This is not a typical academic format that we are having here today, because Mr. Dörre wished a silent farewell without any saying goodbye event. But now I'm looking to the hall and seeing such a great number of people, so obviously it hasn't worked. So this event has a slightly different character. Around 70 minutes, Klaus Dörre will tell us what's left actually means. So, couple of organizational moments. This event is being streamed online for everyone who was not able to travel to Jena, and there is a simultaneous interpretation into English. We are also recording this event, and it will be available in August for all of you. Afterwards, we would like to invite you to our reception with a little champagne and continue our fruitful discussion. So, Klaus, we are delighted to give you the floor. Honored guests, dear colleagues, dear fellow students, here in the hall and all over the world on the internet. I am delighted that you all have accepted my invitation to the farewell lecture today, and I would like to apologize to all those who did not receive a personal invitation in the hustle and bustle of the preparations. It was just a lot to do, and I gotta say we just forgot someone, but not intentionally. Instead, I would like to apologize that I will not be greeting you personally, but I would like to guarantee that all of you are equally important to me, disregarding what kind of social, political position are you taking. And here, this is the first exception out of my manuscript. So Janine Disler is here, Schwenz Trai as well from the Bundestag as well. Very warm welcome to you. The diversity of those who are present today will bring me to being in between the two chairs, between didactics and the content of my manuscript. Some will shake their heads in disbelief of my utopianism, while others will doubt the revolutionary vigor of the cathedral socialism. But I am not here to avoid any offense. The fact that I'm standing in front of you today, even though I wanted to go away quietly, depends on the fact what is actually happening around us. The recent elections to the European Parliament, a party that is considered to be extreme right, won for more than 30% of the votes in Thuringia. The red-red-green governing parties together achieved less than 18%. And in the future, what we will have, 33% of workers across Germany voted for the AfD. And even among union activists also elect this party. And I will not be reading out loud the quotes. This is a quote of a worker from Opel Eisenach. and I will come back to them several times in my lecture, and you will be able, of course, to read those quotes in our study. The shift to the right is taking place despite of the fact that 3.5 million people took part in the largest mass mobilizations. The electoral success of the party is something that I would like to talk about today. If the extreme right is on the rise, and this is what's happening today, what is normal and what is actually a left wing? How should we assess a social and political left? And even more, what does it actually mean, what's left? If some here expect me to answer those questions just immediately, and that I will be promising you a fruitful future, I have to disappoint you. I would be dishonest with myself. Instead, I will start with the basic attitude of myself, and this is the one of self-doubt. When the Italian political scientist Bobbio endeavored the answer to the question, what's left, 3 decades ago, he noted the following. And the left and its doubt is a topic that seems to have been made especially for me, because I have many doubts, and not only the doubts about the left. Given my age and reflecting on my past, I have the strongest doubt, especially about myself. These words I could have written myself. And I do have doubts about myself, my academic work, social commitment, and as a researcher, as the university lecturer. The empirical research, as I have been responsible for in my field of work for 2 decades now, naturally follows the principle of neutrality and is conducted in an open-ended manner. However, in order to be categorized and evaluated, empirical findings must be embedded in theoretically constructed ideas of society. And here you're seeing the quote of Luc Boltanski. This is something that I've been orienting myself on. The tension between empirical, descriptive, and theoretically constructed perspective forces compromises, but it cannot be completely resolved. And this is something which can be innovatively looked at from the social point of view, as Luc Boltanski argues. At least I can say that I did my best to overcome this tension. The existential crisis of the left, the shadows on the left, and the new authoritarianism, as Wilhelm Frank calls it, has its reasons, and I would like to talk about them today. And you will note the arguments which refer even more to my own doubts. Just a little bit about the outline. So this is about my doubt. I will start and touch upon the right and left distinction and the meaning of it. And within this topic, I would like to come to my first thesis, which is that the end of a political protest is the struggle cycle, the end of which means that the terms right and left need to be redefined. What is politically right, what is politically left is never definitively clear. The distinction, the distinguishing of those terms can be completely different from time to time and can even represent opposing positions. And we also see it in the historical critical dictionary of Marxism. The term left originally comes, right-left originally comes from the French Revolution, the distinguishing between those two terms. So the supporters of monarchy insisted sitting on the right of the monarch, like Christ, the opposite, the left. So they were the opponents of the monarchy. Forever, the left were sitting at the children's table. There, at this children's table, they were representing liberalism, enlightenment, in the rejection of a ruling order that invoked the divine right. Today, within my farewell speech, it will not be possible to talk about the history of the right and the left. But what I can mention, that here in Jena, the revolutionary spirit of the Enlightenment was echoed by those fabulous rebels who utilized university freedom, which was completely unusual for that time. And as I said, I will not be reading all of the quotes, but this one I will. Although the food of Viennaans had a reputation of being inedible, it's not that different today. But the students knew that their minds were being fed with the finest food. Then, late at night, when empty beer mugs filled the rough wooden tables in the city's pubs, students discussed the art, philosophy, and literature. After 8 or 9 bottles of beer, the exhilarated young men staggered home, woke up early in the morning, and with aching heads rushed to the lecture theater to learn from their young and radical professors. This is what Andrea Wolf writes in her marvelous book about the early Romantics. Leaving the non-male aside, this is a wonderful example of an academic public sphere which back then had this implicit distinguishing between the right and left, which went beyond the borders of Jena and made its protagonists famous. Since that time, the meanings of the conceptual dyad have constantly changed. Since the last third of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, the left-right difference became synonymous with the opposing forces of what capitalism brought to us. According to the Swedish social scientist Göran Therborn, the 20th century was characterized by a twofold dialect. Göran Therborn said that there were two dialectics which characterized the century. And both dynamics were aimed at strengthening the both classes. The left stood for workers, democratic, social, communist, or anarchist self-image, which first emerged in the early industrialized countries. Anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movements, as we say today, the countries of the global south represented the second force. Being left is a politically something very different than the parliamentary system. Being on the left is being critical and oppositional. Something which is opposing the expansion of the market. At the same time, the left-right scheme became a criterion for internal differentiation within the left. The representative of revolutionary currents, so the reformists were considered representatives of the revolutionary current. In communist parties, which considered themselves to be in possession of a scientific compass, there was always the left wing and the right wing, and sometimes this distinction was even life-threatening, especially in the Stalinist rule. And I will once again go away from my manuscript. I've been sitting here at the next door hotel at the process of and was discussing the process of Bukhari, something that will be important for me my whole life. So those different meanings of distinguishing of the right and the left, they are changing constantly, and this is something that is feeling the political hegemony, and something that is present today. Today we are on a historical turning point, and this point requires from us the redefinition of the left. Such turning point always occur when a political cycle struggles. And now the talk of political cycles needs explanation, because to my opinion, there is no appropriate explanation of this mechanism. I will illustrate this. And here I will quote Bob Jessup. This is there was a huge passage of Ernest Monday, which unfortunately had to be shortened and cut out. The politics and capital accumulation had to be determined by the political handling in the first up to the last instance. This is the quote of Bob Jessup. And as we know this, and I would like to add, this is something that it has been described also in the French theory of regulation. The social handlings, the handling of social actors, of the groups. This was the argumentation of the political scientist Joachim Hirsch from Frankfurt. He was saying that there is the tendency of capitalism, which is always referring to the profit. This can be influenced by political issues, by legislation in its stricter sense. Political cycles of struggles and protests are periods in which the left-right distinction is reproduced, but the meanings and content is getting renewed. And the word pair is a dyad which poles are completely opposing to each other. It means right and left do not mean that this is a harmonic universe. This is a dyad, opposing poles from the interpretation of divergent, even hostile elements. But before we will come to this dyad, I will just touch upon the scheme of right and left. And this helps us to understand the modern society.
So this objection is, let me say up front, as old as the conceptual dyad itself. Depending on the historical constellation, the assertion of political irrelevance is sometimes put forward by a right wing that has gone to the defensive, sometimes by a disillusioned left wing. And often such doubts have an academic counterpart. In the mid of the 1980s, doubts about the meaningfulness of the term pair were prominently substantiated by the sociologist Ulrich Beck. The ecological conflict, he argued, no longer fitted into the classic left-right divide. And while Beck had at least held out of the prospect of a redefinition of left and right, the differentiation theorist Armin Nasehi goes much further. In his book, The Last Hour of Truth, Nasehi explains why the left-right semantics do not stand up to the reality of differentiated societies. And he compares Uli Brandt's left-wing criticism of growth with the conservative criticism of Meinhard Miegel. In addition to the differences, Nasehi identifies similarities in terms of content, before finally accusing Brandt and Miegel of missing the actual core problem of the modern societies. The problem formula is, big surprise, complexity. So this is what the system theorists always find. No surprise at all. And of course, I have to add that Amin Nasehi, within his framework where he is trapped in, has a brilliant argument. So for the new part of the argument, he says the objection hits the mark, but it is nevertheless irrelevant. The antithetical poles of left and right were and are never to be understood as rigid opposites. So between between black and white, there is always gray, and political formations can be center-left or center-right. They can approach each other beyond recognition and thus form an enclosed third, which is clearly distinct from the radical or extreme poles of the left-right difference. The asymmetrical demobilization of Angela Merkel, which aimed to take away the issues from the center-left competition at an early stage, stand for this enclosed third. He attempts to overcome the right-left distinction by performing cross-fronts or a populist recombination of right and left content, however, represent an excluded third party. And the Italian Cinque Stelle or Sarah Wagenknecht Bündnis, with its socially conservative political program, are current examples. However, the included and the excluded third parties exist only because they have to relate to the continuum of a right-left distinction. That is the most important example, the most important proof I can give to you. In 2020, we had a whole event where we explained that whole dynamic. I'm gonna skip that part. But the most important proof for the relevance of the diet is shown by Amin Yasemi himself. His aforementioned book documents an exchange of letters with Götz Kubitschek, the new right-wing thinker. Towards the end of the exchange with dear Mr. Kubitschek, the sociologist once again presents his strongest argument, and I quote, "There is no reason to be right-wing in a strong sense today. Incidentally, it is only against this background that the phenomenon on which we have a consensus, namely that people most talk on the left and live on the right, take a special meaning." So this aforementioned dichotomy of talking left and living right is real, and we know it is, and there is no doubt about it. So, as expected, Kubitschek does not follow Nasehi's call to let go of being right-wing and be satisfied with self-positioning in national conservatism. Instead, he coolly counters that he wants to be right-wing and also live on the right. The chief ideologue of the former Institute for State Policy leaves no doubt as to what he is counting on. And you can see it in the lower quote. I will not read it, but only explain what he says. He says that if it gets worse and the resources become more scarce, then the people will react accordingly. And they will choose ethical or national collectives, and they will get closer to them, approach them, and become a part of them. So we can see that in the Islamic circles, for example. And then he accuses Nasi of the fetish of the individuum that does not belong to any group. And he says, we can't clear that up right now, but we will see, we will see. I could imagine how Kubitschek felt at that point and how he would feel right now, because the topic of migration is topic number one in all the questions in the Eastern countries, and it is that topic number one that is associated to migration, to public security and safety. And that is the main point for the radical right wing. I would like to. I don't want to accuse Nasei of publishing those letters in his own favor, even though we would have to say that back then he could have known about those remigration fantasies. It was in 2015 when the book was published, so we could already see what was said back then, and he tells Kubitschek, please don't say right-wing, say national conservative. He just counters and says that he wants to be right-wing and he wants to live right-wing. But for me, I'm focusing on something else. So in case of doubt, the actors try to break down this complexity because they know about the antithetic diet, which is why the left-wing distinction has persisted for centuries despite all social changes. And this is why it is an attitude saying to belong to either to the right or the left that can be explained scientifically. It can't be explained scientifically. So maybe my father knows how to explain it. He is watching right now, but I couldn't. So in the explanation, the most frequently used criterion for distinguishing between right-wing and left-wing attitudes is the positioning towards the ideal of equality. And in various combinations with freedom and peace, left-wing egalitarianism names elementary goals for which people would be prepared to fight. Egalitarian and therefore left-wing politics strives to remove all those obstacles that make men and women, and we could happily add today people who belong to the LGBTQIA community, less equal. The central concern of this historical left, however, was to eliminate what is identified as the main obstacle to equality among different people, namely, I'm quoting, private property, the terrible right. And with this, I will already come to my next thesis, which is quite, I will summarize that roughly because I want to have time for the main point I want to make. I don't want to take too much time now. So even though I will come back to this terrible right again, for now it is enough for me to conclude that the right-left distinction is by no means superfluous with the differentiation of modern societies. The political cycle that began after 1989 provides vivid proof for this. The real core problem is not complexity, but an immanent tension that is inherent in every form of leftism. So my third thesis is that the left must be utopian, otherwise it is not left and cannot be distinguished from the right. But sooner or later, the utopian surplus that the left needs as a driving force is confronted with the necessity of every political movement to exercise power at a certain point in its history. I know some people think Holloway and there's a different way. It won't work like that today. I'm telling you. Let me tell you. Okay, so when the point comes to, it becomes apparent, I quote, "The utopian project is by definition unrealizable. If it is not to be realized, it is essential to overcome the course of history by accelerating it beyond all measure. But as Marx well knew, the coercion of the course of history transforms the utopian project into its opposite." And now I will skip some parts because I want to tell you that exactly what we can hear in this quote is that what we saw in the protest cycles and it happened after 89. And we could basically say that back then we already had a situation, I recall it myself, where we thought this is the end. And we thought that we had to see if it was still possible to be left-wing. And Dahrendorf who I included in my written speech, says that the whole left, including the non-communist left-wing party, was the idea of a better society was taken away from them. So that was the situation in 1989. And then I'm really, again, summarizing very much. Something happened which we didn't expect. Very quickly, the left party reorganized itself. And it started with attack, with globalization, critical movements, with big forums, global forums. There were mass protests. I can only remember you of the Battle of Seattle, which, as in Genoa at the time, were met with excessive state repression. So people went to jail, etc., etc. And then that continued on a new level, you could say. After 2007, 2008, the global financial and economic crisis. And you could say that the left-wing parties were recreating themselves like the phoenix out of the ash. And we could see that, for example, in the Spanish movement, El Movimiento. And later, these were one of the biggest social movements worldwide, which are Fridays for Future. So we have huge mobilizations. We could see them in the past few years. The party with Janine Wissner was recreated after 89 and got over 12% right away in the voting and was the flagship of Europe. So this was the German left-wing party back then, starting with huge steps. And it really seemed to be that way. It seemed that the left-wing parties and if socialism was getting strong again, getting up again. And Frank Schirrmacher, back then, he was the editor of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, of the Frankfurter Journal. He said, "I believe that the left party is right." He wrote that looking at the authoritarian policy in Europe, and he was ashamed of that as a conservative. And if you move further on from the left said that socialism was the winner of the year. They said there is a new lust for socialism, warned the Neue Züricher Zeitung, and the Progressive Socialist Party that Corbyn envisions no longer wants to reform the economic system but to replace it. The huge response of Corbyn revealed that he was asking the right questions, the FAZ wrote in 2017. So the conservative feuilleton was concerned about the sympathy that young people, even in the USA, harbored for Bernie Sanders and his socialism. I'm not going to give you the numbers, but it was big parts of the society in the US. In the US, they perceived socialism positively. Zander started his speech by saying, "I'm a democratic socialist." And when the Times asked him if he maybe better shouldn't have said that, he said, no, I did that on purpose. I wanted to provoke people. I wanted to see what they did. I wanted to tell them that I was a democratic socialist, and it worked perfectly. So that was, if I had given this speech back then, I would have stood here completely differently. I don't want to tell you all the stories I could tell you about this. But what has happened since then? The left is going down, is in free fall. The self-destruction is their favorite business, and after the election defeat, the socialist awakening within Labour is long gone. And all of you know that they are in an existential crisis. The climate movement has become very differentiated and is also disappearing by that. So that means that we are again facing the question, how could this happen? So the peak of a political fighting cycle, and then again the fall going down, and nobody can really explain what happened. How can it happen? So the problem of the left seemed that their representatives were only representing realities that were utopian or didn't exist. And they are worrying about the political counterpart. And there are many reasons for the decline of a diverse left that resisted the global regime of unleashed markets, but I will leave it at the main cause. So the question is if he is right. I would say yes, he was, but for other reasons than the former editor of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung said. So for the decline of a diverse left that resisted the global regime of unleashed Marx applies wherever they exercised power. The left was unable to actually fulfill hopes for an improvement in society that made its temporary rise possible. The left promises for a better society have not been realized anywhere. So let's take, for example, the unequal distribution of wealth and income, which has reached obscene proportions both globally and nationally. This is data from Vox Pop from 2022, realized by Jasmin Bobka and Anna Melis. And I will not give you the concrete data. Nevertheless, I can tell you that there are vast majorities. It's almost unanimous. So almost everybody says that the welfare could be distributed more equally. So there is a criticism of capitalism. So even if you take into account all this data, we have to note that barely anybody believes that the leftism could change the system or make a more equal society. So you could say that the inequality is not the trigger point. To summarize it and to give you the book title, you might recognize. Triggerpunkte by Steffen Mau, a dear colleague of mine. So nobody gets angry about that. And that's a fact. If being left is connected to feeling powerless, then it proves to be less assertive when it weakens itself through exclusionism. And Erich Fromm wrote about this. So back then, fighting the elite in part of the society, longing for subordination. As long as left effectively symbolized the struggle against the authorities, it was attractive to the rebellious authoritarian type. This changed when the Nazis opened valves for rebellious feelings for which finance, capital, and Judaism served as symbols for power. Because a divided left offered to them no effective defense of their social interests, employees, civil servants, and, it should be added, workers in rural industrial regions pinned their hopes to the NSDAP.
Despite all those differences, I know I have to be very careful with historical comparisons, but despite all the differences, there are obvious parallels to the present day. It is hardly a coincidence that AFD is becoming major in the rural areas, industrial regions of Thuringia, for example. In the 20s, the left wing quickly became major after And after that, fascism dominated. The same, a very similar proceeding we are observing here in Thuringia. So someone from Romeda, what they wish for is stable democratic center. A great book. But the general thesis is, I am sorry, I think this thesis is completely incorrect. I am sure if we go to Zonneberg and we conduct an empirical study there, we will get the voters back, and we will see that the center is shifting to the right, but they're still wishing for democracy. And then we have again this thesis of Romeda. If people say that this is the vote for a stable democratic relations, I am I have to say, I'm sorry, but to my opinion, this thesis is completely wrong, even though this is a great book. So let us note, when the social and political left is powerless, if it proves to be less assertive, when it weakens through exclusionism, division, dogmatism, just short to say, when it is no longer different from all the established others in the public perceptions, then a political vacuum is created that today's national radicalism, similar to its fascist predecessors, knows how to exploit for itself through effective mobilization. And this is how I am moving to my final thesis, which I will be describing a little bit more thorough. My fourth and the last thesis is as well the most difficult part of my speech today, is the left of the 21st century has not been born, it has to be created. It is to be created. And there are parties that allege that the left of the 21st century exists already. To my opinion, sorry, it has not been born yet. It is yet to emerge. So how would it look like, the left of the 21st century? It will only succeed if it combines the issues of social and ecological reproduction, of the labor issues with the transformational issues. And then it must return to the center. Klaus-Jürgen Klopf also mentioned it in Frankfurter Rundschau. Thank you, Klaus-Jürgen. When I write this thesis, I am aware that it will probably trigger horror, not only among feminists, but also among all those who stand for identity politics issues. But I don't mean to reassure you, but probably I need to be here very precise. The left of the 21st century must be intersectional, or it will not be at all. And the same said Brigitte, I said the same at Brigitte Reinbacher last week. Instead of already speaking of the left of the 21st century, we need to consider that there are two left parties, two left bodies. One has spirit of Porto Alegre, World Social Forum, with the opposition with capitalist hyperglobalization during the post-political cycles. Actors representing a continuity of the old socialist labor movements, and here are the key words as vertical organizations, workers' fights, and workers' force. locate themselves predominantly on the capital-labor conflicts. So the competing party of libertarian currents and movements, on the other hand, focuses on self-organization, and this rejects economic growth as a goal of emancipatory politics, in addition to the axis of ethnicity and nationality and gender, and operates mainly in the field of ecological social conflicts. After the left after 89 was still a reproductive, feminist, ecological, and anti-racist left. This part of the left was extremely successful in that decades. It has fundamentally shaken the instrumental relationship to non-human nature, what people call the Neolithic Revolution. It has attacked the asymmetrical distribution of power in patriarchally dominated gender relations, and successfully scandalized racist discriminations, such movements of people of color, for example, as Black Lives Matters. This success came about because, or although, the terrible right constituted of capitalism, and it was the driver of this force, and the capitalist expansionism was kind of lost. I think Brigitte Aulenbacher would agree, dear Brigitte. It should be neither androcentric nor Eurocentric. The dynamics of capitalist land seizures are driven by a limited number of axes of conflict in this system. These conflict lines, and Mao and colleagues speak memorably of top-bottom and today-tomorrow as them inside-out conflicts. They are of social significance today, but they are not the origin of those conflicts. Specifically, capitalist conflicts in their respective function have the reproduction of capitalist imperatives, such as overexploitation, and over is here in the brackets. So it shouldn't be relativized in any way. So the scope of the list limiting patriarchal domination, using the labor of nature in more careful way, and correcting racial discrimination is relatively large, without capitalist property as such having to be fundamentally questioned. Just look at the Scandinavian countries and look at the practical examples. Capitalist production relations and their embedding in the property system are losing sides that excludes all dominated classes from production decisions. So the most counter movements have formed in opposition to that, in opposition to the market radicalism in the past decades. This weakens at the moment, and within this process, within this transitional phase, it is described by the philosopher Günther Anders as the separation of production and conscious. And out of this book, I've quoted today several times, but I think it's very aptly what he's saying. The active, passive, neutral, the co-doing in the work process ensures that worker is driven along. While work as such is considered moral under all circumstances, the goal and result of work are fundamentally considered morally neutral in the act of working. No matter what one is working on, the work product remains beyond good and evil. So talking about SUVs or other ecologically negative products. The manufacturing of the product is beyond good and bad. And the labor market produces the lack of conscience. It is the birthplace of conformist, and even more, the most important cause of apocalypse blindness. How things have to be produced and manufactured, what has to be produced, how much money do the workers have to earn. If you are within the system, then you're playing within the system, and you cannot ask yourselves this moral question. And this is the lack of consciousness. I would like to use the socio-ecological transformation as an example to illustrate what this realization means. Let's start with the climate change. If current trends continue, the planet is not heading to the 1.5 degree, but to a 2.8 degree Celsius global warming scenario. So it has been described in various studies. Until the end of the century, the warming should be around 200%, and a third of humanity will lose their habitat. So we can imagine that Europe will not exist as we know it. So we are talking about apocalypse here. There is a very nice study, very conventional one. So I just used this conventional study not to seem too left. The study of Hadrian Bilal and Diego Kenzig. They assume an increase in global average temperatures of 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in their calculation model. And they compare the economic damage that would be caused by a permanent war in their own country with that of a permanent war in their own country. So this is how it is. If nothing happens with those major ecological dangers, if we do not do anything, it will lead us to issue of class. What is class? I will not describe it here thoroughly. We still need to say that the decisions of investments are exclusively met by a teeny tiny group of 0.08% of adult population. And only this tiny group makes this kind of investment decisions, which are ecologically negative. The investments are being made in reference to profit, but not in reference to climate neutrality. Therefore, this little group makes the decisions that concern all of us. A lot of people are excluded out of this decision making, and this is the separation of the lack of consciousness with having it. Okay, let's go back to the political dimension of this change, and to the new cycle of struggle and protest, which is forcing all relevant actors to the correct. To correct their coordinate system, thus also to readjust the right-left distinction. And here I am within a political interregnum. The old financialized capitalism based on a continual seizure of social land cannot disappear. The new, a society that pursues socio-ecological restructuring, at least in the form of green capitalism, cannot emerge. I've said it several times already in terms of the green capitalism. The standstill is dangerous for the budgets available because the budgets are shrinking in time. The confusing situation makes it difficult to redefine the poles of right and of the left. At least we can say the following. Trying to solve the problem of what I call economic ecological pincer crisis solely through the market mechanism, let's say moderate right wing, is still doing business as usual in a modified way. So we are kind of moving forward to the past. The turning the state into a new actor that only repairs the market, but actively creates and regulates them in order to combine ecological and social sustainability is moderately left. And this is exactly what Armin Nasehi says, quoting him, there is something like a strange self-correction of social crisis, a strange form of resilience that at sometimes high cost but without any collapse means then that things just keep going. And this is a scientific legitimization for a conservative but a dangerous policy. Business is usually with shrinking budgets, with shrinking time, difficult, I'd say. Mariana Mazzucano, the economist, insists instead that the leapfrog innovations and investments have always been dependent on the strategic planning and resources on an intervening state. And here is it can be explained on an example of the moon landing. A lot of people say it never happened, but we are not going to dive into this discussion. So as Mazzucato says, there is a planned mission for implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the center-right and the center-left are linked by consensus insofar as they settle their disputes within procedures and institutions that are associated with liberal democracies. Anyone who says that the climate change does not exist or naturalizes inequality replaces race with replaces race with homogenizing concepts of culture, talks about misanthropy in a specific way. This is the far right.
If the term right-wing is primarily applied to formations such as the AfD in the current political milieu, this is strictly speaking wrong. I have seen Heinrich Best, I have to add that at this point, and the left can only exist if there is a recognized liberal conservative right that is capable of being satisfied as a political competitor. It should be therefore examined whether the term right-wing should be applied exclusively to those formations that stand outside the constitutional arc, as was initially in the case in post-war Western Germany. The term would then not be applied to moderate, liberal or conservative parties, and I would add to a caveat to this statement. So it has happened that also in the everyday use that right-wing means a radical right-wing, but you always have to take everything into account. So just as the entire left, including the anti-communist left, has a responsibility for Stalinism, the moderate right has a responsibility for historical fascism. If Ursula von der Leyen separates the good post-fascist Meloni from the bad right-wing populists in the run-up to the European Parliament elections, then she is not living up to this historical responsibility. And if Christian Democrat politicians in Thuringia allow non-party candidates to enter parliaments on both CDU and AfD lists in the communal parliament, this is irresponsible. And they are also acting irresponsibly if they create political majorities by cooperating with the AfD in order to prohibit the generation of renewable power, for example, just to implement what they want. Just wait a second, because now it comes. So I have left out an important question in the discussion so far. What is radically left? I understand radical in the sense of getting to the root of the problem. It's a bit tricky in comparison to the right wing with the definition. So it means a system transforming left wing, and the same is not a synonym for the extreme left. And the reason for this is as follows. To locate oneself on the system transforming left, it cannot mean falling behind the standards of freedom of opinion, pluralism, democratic procedures, etc., that liberal democracies institutionally guarantee. The reason was already mentioned by Rosa Luxemburg when she wrote in her criticism of the Bolsheviks, and I will quote that again. And the real people, the real experts for Luxemburg, they always blame me to say something wrong, but she actually wrote it, and she said that the cumbersome mechanism of democratic institutions has a powerful corrective, precisely in the lively movement of the masses, in their incessant pressure. And the more democratic the institution, the livelier and stronger the pulse of the political life of the masses, the more immediate and precise the effect, despite the rigid party signs, outdated electoral lists, etc. Certainly, every democratic institution has its limitations and shortcomings, which it probably shares with all human institutions, but the remedy found by Trotsky and Lenin, the elimination of democracy altogether, is even worse than the evil it is intended to control. For it buries the living spring itself, out of which alone all the innate inadequacies of social institutions can be corrected. The active, uninhibited, vigorous political life of the broadest masses of the people. And she is right. She didn't always stick to that attitude. I have to say that, I have to underline it, and if the masses move and if they make mistakes, we could say let's better commit the mistakes with them instead of separating from them. But a transformative left that takes this critique to heart incorporates the best of political liberalism. So we heard that at the Benjamin lectures by Leah Epi, and she proposes that the best political liberalism should incorporate that. So in this respect, there is a normative connection with the formations of the moderate right and left. And the horseshoe theory, which some conservatives still want to hold on to, does not work for such a constellation. However, this is what distinguishes the transformative from the moderate left. The radical democratic left currents assume that democracy and capitalism are ultimately incompatible, which is why the society, based on the principle of expansive ownership, must be replaced by a different order. The decisive reason for this is the aforementioned separation of production and conscience, which Günther Andra's analysis so precisely. And as Luc Boltanski aptly points out, the transformative left of the 21st century needs a liberation project. And this can only consist of overcoming the exclusion of large majorities from production and investment decisions by radically expanding and democratizing economic decision-making power. So as soon as the question of property, the question of decision-making power over the what, how, with what and for what purpose of production is raised, the common ground between left and right is quickly exhausted, and the interests of capital and labor are once again clearly separated. Against the monopolized decision-making power on the capital side, what Günther Anders called the production strike, and I'd like to add this to Harald Wolf, who I hope is also here, with whom I was able to work for so many years, which I'm very grateful for. He also mentioned that again. So it would be needed what it would be called a production strike. So such a strike would no longer merely improve working conditions, but would involve the workers' refusal to no longer manufacture products that have irresponsible effects. Reconnecting production and conscience by radically democratizing the ownership-based decision-making power over the material dimension of products and production processes means gaining freedom. For we are only truly free when we take responsibility also for what we produce. This, it should be added, would be a positive understanding of freedom that marks an ethical boundary between left and right. The anti-utopia of an exclusively market-driven individualization, as currently celebrated in the Hayek Society, and I recommend reading this if you haven't read it, in the Hayek Society laudatory speech for the Argentinian anarcho-capitalist Milei, can and must be counted on by an understanding of freedom that cannot be reduced to the negative, to the absence of coercion. So Milei, in his speech, not Milei, but the one giving the laudatory speech, says that all the collective units have to be taken away, and it is sold as a freedom project. And that is the purest utopia of a capital that liberates us from everything. So that's pure insanity. And the FAZ luckily documented it. So if you're celebrated by the negative freedom idea, and if you want to put something against it, then it has to be a positive understanding of freedom. So the idea of a human nature that has become historical and corresponds to an understanding of freedom that is embedded in the society of man, in the knowledge of society, and it constitutes, as Karl Polanyi put it, an inescapable limit to market socialization. Defining freedom projects that fulfill this high standard is the task of a transformative left, which must necessarily be plural. Because for every contradiction, for every line of conflict, there are rival actors vying for influence. Competing diversity is probably the normal state of the left. So, for every contradictions, there are different left-wing actors, which is why this is the normal state of the left. So if there was a basic consensus within the left, that would enable what Hans-Jürgen Urban called a mosaic left. So for the time being, we're no longer far away from such a basic consensus, but for the laboratories in which perspectives for the left of the 21st centuries are being worked on do exist. For example, those who have been active within or around the left party will still be there. Should the party lose its parliamentary existence? I'm losing my voice over this. So there are left-wing people in the trade unions, in the Greens, in the social democracy, in the cultural scene, and even in sports clubs. So I just mentioned the Roter Stern Leipzig, whose second men's team fortunately didn't get relegated again, despite some appalling performances, I have to add. But nevertheless, at least there are left-wing people participating in this. So many of those involved are young, and they can learn from the left-green parties in the Nordic capitals that celebrated successes in the European elections. They will note that the left in France and Italy is forming new alliances to oppose the shift to the right, and they will also analyze the flare-up of industrial action that has seen militant trade unions define the new cycle of process over the last few months. So I really participated in this. And I hope that these young people will draw knowledge and strength from this to equip the left of the 21st century with the necessary utopian surplus, but also the sense of revolutionary real policy of radical reformism that is necessary to successfully intervene in the everyday political milieu. So, as I present this, I realize that there is an unspoken fundamental doubt in the room. Does this outlined readjustment of the right and left distinction also apply to issues that are currently dividing the left? I tend to cautiously say yes, because now I have to finish the circle. Nevertheless, I have to give you hope. So let's take this main topic of the right wing. Let's start with migration. The population with a history of migration currently only appears in the hegemonic discourse in the form of the negative classifications, and not only in the AfD. For example, the program of a party that I have classified as the excluded third, which aims to combine right-wing and left-wing content, states whether it is the heating law, the ban on combustion engines, the continued uncontrolled migration, or the disastrous energy policy, ideology and a lack of planning are driving this government, not the solution to the people's problems. Uncontrolled migration is the key word. So anyone who views migrants as either security risk or a cost factor is ignoring what the production perspective immediately reveals with regard to the professions that maintain the system. So you can see it on the slide. I took this slide from a dear colleague. She gave it to me, and you can take a look, because in those professions that maintain the system, if we take out everybody with a migration background, we can just shut down the whole country. It's not going to work. So if I look at the Workers' Council in Kassel-Baunatal, for example, 40 nations and over 40 nationalities. If I look at Eisenach, for example, all of those workers who work there only for a limited of time, all of them have a migration background. Only a very few of them have the German nationality, citizenship. So if they want to mass deportations, then they have to live with the consequences, because everything's going to shut down here in this country then. And if this happens, then I wonder if it's really adequate to approach Anton by saying, yes, we're gonna deport quicker, or if we maybe have to say what Naika Fotan recently brilliantly explained on a conference organized by Matthias Quent, that Germany is an immigration society. It already is an immigration society, and it will remain so. 40% of the people have a history of migration here in Germany. And we can't just forget about this. We can't just put it away. It is a fact. But if it is a fact, why don't we talk about the advantages of this? Not in the sense of happy, happy, joy, joy, but about the conflicts that raise. Also being willing to have those conflicts, but Germany has an immigration society, and I really wish for one politician in Berlin says that phrase without adding a but or anything, and then expects the consequences that such a phrase means and brings up.
Almost at the end, but there are still two white elephants here in the room. The first one that I still see is the war in Ukraine, the war over Gaza Strip divides people across the political parties, across the political sides. This war of aggression which Russia is waging against civilian infrastructure and the Ukrainian civilian population in violation of international law and in a criminal manner cannot be justified by anything, absolutely nothing. Recognizing Ukraine's rights to self-defense must not lead to the acceptance of a progressive militarization of a society, of the society. And just look at it. 8.2 billion for metallurgy. So what will happen with the companies? And if we look at what Rosa Luxemburg said, militarization, all the companies militarizing, and what will happen with them? The left must always be an anti-war left that fights for rapid negotiations. And to my opinion, its main concern must be the prevention of a new world war into which we could slip despite all trivializations. So we should live left and think left. It's difficult for me to show you this, but I know this is the worst slide. At every game, we have the flags with yellow and black colors, so everyone misunderstands it. I know that this is maybe a little bit exaggerated, but only visually you have according associations. I'm sure there are some Dortmund fans here in the room, but still, it should be changed. And that brings me to the war, and I will read it out loud because this is very sensible. The war that is spread beyond Gaza. This war forces us to review the ethical foundations of left-wing emancipatory policy. Despite all the difficulties, and unfortunately I do not have enough time to go into the details, despite all the difficulties, I would like to summarize them. Hamas is a terrorist organization, not a liberation organization. The attack on Israel is a terrible war crime that must not be relativized in any way. Anyone searching for causes of this war is behaving as should behave as scientists behave. It is not about relativization of crimes. If you ask yourselves about causes without anti-Semitic background, you can see things critically. Regardless of this, the following must apply. War crimes remain war crimes. Doesn't matter who commits them. And they remain war crimes even then if they are committed in response to other war crimes. Even the government, the criticism of the government and of Netanyahu does not have anything to do with hatred towards Israel or Jews. And it should be allowed to do this at universities. And if it's not, we're just capitulating from rationality. I could have stopped here, but I need to say something else. But this is the end, really. I know that I have not talked about many things that are actually essential: digitalization, North and South conflict, socialism, Marxian theory, and more and more. I covered some of this in the Utopia of Socialism, and I will not repeat it here. But I will take the liberty of expressing one more wish at the end for this purpose, and will stand as a still professional dwarf on the shoulders of the intellectual titan who gives this university its name. The inaugural lecture of Friedrich Schiller ends with following words: "A noble desire must glow within us to contribute from our own means to the rich legacy of truth, morality, and freedom that we have received from the previous world, and must pass into the world to come, richly enriched, and to fasten our fleeing experience to this imperishable chain that winds through all human generations. However different the destiny that awaits you in civil society may be, you can all contribute something to it." So you can all contribute something to it. The words are made for the present. So let's not fool ourselves. The shift to the right will lead to a silent pressure in universities, in institutions, and will maybe lead to adjustment in those institutions. Against this, we must defend scientific reason. I would not have said it previously, but I need to say it now. We need to defend the freedom of science. That's why we need fabulous rebels more than ever, but not only in Jena, all over the world. And I've quoted the case at the beginning with 8 or 9 mugs of beer. It doesn't matter how many pints of beer they can handle, the students can handle. They shouldn't have to bear the burden of the striving for fame. They should not remain in the university bubble, but instead help those who are rarely seen and heard in public, give them the voice. Antonia, that I've quoted several times, the queer shop stewardess, and she embodies pretty much everything about the 21st century leftist could be. And maybe she's the one who'd convince Anton from Opel, as Marcos and I in our discussions had several times now, but you would confirm I've come forward very well. However, like the revolutionary Schiller, teachers and students alike should be able to say that nowhere else should they enjoy as much freedom as here in Jena. The conditions for this are excellent here, because an entire special, and I've said it several times, the entire special research center is dealing with the central question, the question of property system. And we have the protagonists here, and they will give you all the conditions to conduct your free research. I just want to say all the conditions are there to be those fabulous rebels. So the field is therefore academically prepared, but a symbolic gesture could accentuate what would immediately be interpreted as resistance to the extreme right. At the university where he has done his doctorate, a certain Karl Marx has only had a place in the evidence room since the fall of communism. Here in our storage room, we have this kind of proof. And we do not need to put up the old bust back. There should be a proof of that, though, maybe a little bit more abstract. Free Karl instead of destroying scientific reason. Wouldn't it be a nice project for the new university president, who is actually a Marx? Unfortunately, I do not him personally yet, but his namesake would probably agree. I've talked to Mr. Rosenthal, also with Miss Krieger. She could give a seminar with all the suggestions what kind of project could be conducted at the university. So, dear Mr. Marx, I hope you heard the applause. We want to see actions. I do hope it happens. I will probably look at it from rather outside, and what remains for me to say is goodbye and thank you. My thanks go to the Friedrich Schiller University, the faculty, the Institute of Sociology for allowing me to teach and to research with great freedom. It goes to my research group, and it remains a thorn in my flesh. They would have deserved to continue after my retirement. I am sure they would have stayed here for 2 hours more, but I could say that if you take the data and compare the publications it with other international institutions, we are in the on the blue list, so to say, and I think this is such a pity that this research group will not exist in the form it exists now after my retirement. So thank you to my research group, and I will make a connection with other thank yous, and I would like to call some names. My first thank you is going to my father, now almost 93 years old, and his companion Crystal. I hope they've managed all the technological challenges, they've managed to overcome them, and they are here online with us. A thank you also goes to my sister Susanna and other family members, like my oldest, as well as my oldest friend Gert Blümke-Rumpf and his wife. They are here today. So I will, of course, not tell the story with Otto and everything, but also a special thank you goes to the people who I would ask to come forward. My Minister for Interior, Rebecca Sequeira. I gotta say, I was always, excuse me, I was always lucky with people working in my secretariat, with Miss Stock. She supported me, Jeanette Prosa as well. It was so good, but Rebecca was extraordinary, so everyone who had to deal with her know that she is always managing the mountains of work that I throw on her. And I have to say, thank you, and I would not be here without you. And of course, without the people that I will name right now, my wife, Angela. She had an even a more demanding job than me, and she had to put up with me. And I would like to call my son Nelson and Aliyah here as well. Idalia. She is the representative of German studies. I'm sure she will be criticizing my speech afterwards, but still, I wanted to ask those four people to come forward. Without them, I would not be standing here, as well as I am thinking many more. Many of you are sitting here today, and I promise you that during the next 6 months, I will personally contact you, or maybe in a written way. Everyone heard that. So if everyone heard that, I need to do this. So that was all that I planned to say today. Thank you for your patience. The professor is living, and if he stays healthy, Klaus Dörre will be speaking occasionally in the near future, even without the burden of his office. Thank you very much.
I'd say that's enough for now. Let's go outside and toast. No, 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 just a second, just a second. Thank you very much, dear Klaus, for your speech. I think we will have the opportunity to talk about your speech, and I'd like to briefly stay seated for 2 more minutes before we continue with our toast, because, dear Klaus, we can't just let you go like this. So the Institute, but also we, as your working group, we would like to say thank you, and I would also like to thank everybody who made this event possible. So Rebecca was already there. She organized everything. She was the center for everything. Thanks also to the interpreters for the good work. Okay. So good. Dear Klaus, you didn't want a big official goodbye. You didn't want big words, so I will stick to this, which is why we have only a few very informal words to you on behalf of the Institute for Sociology. We'd like to thank you for leading sociology and creating sociology in Jena for over 2 decades. So you, as a person, as a researcher, you were very successful, but also as a professor. Until today, you have very crowded, very packed seminars, but also as a professor at the university who really knows how to lead a university. Yes, you do. As well as in your function as a public sociologist. So we could see that again today, that you give access to the broad public to those research results. And we would also like to thank you for being so good in those roles, and you're going to leave a huge gap for us that we have to fill, if it is even possible at all. Now the question is, what will follow? We want to wish you 2 things. A lot of times time for things, beautiful things that are not connected to science or research. And secondly, health, because we really wish that you can enjoy those things for a very long time, which is why we'd like to give you two things. We got a couple of bottles of wines, hoping that you can already enjoy them. But as we know that you are an expert in music too, we also got you two tickets for the Sterne for a concert. They will play a concert in Jena in November, and also about this biography. The first time I came to Jena was in 2008. I had just become a professor, and the stars, Die Sterne, the band played back then. I was way younger, and I really loved the sociology in Jena, and you really formed this here. And thank you for this. Thank you so much. Now I have to say something else. Frank Schirrmacher and me, we saw each other for the last time, I believe, when the pandemic started in 2020, not 12, 2020. The pandemic started. We went to a concert in Leipzig, and we all thought, yeah, that's not so bad with the whole pandemic thing. And you can still see that on the internet. Uwe Bunk is also responsible for this. He's seated over there. That you can still see the concert where Nelson and I are in the very front and really try to catch the virus in Coney Island right in front of the stage. So you can still see this. And I'm glad to be able to see them again, Frank and Die Sterne. I wanted to ask them to come anyways, but that's also a very nice way to see them. Thank you so much. Yes, also on behalf of our department, I would like to thank you, Klaus, and to not only say that on behalf of everybody, I would like to ask everybody from our department to come to the front, please, to say thank you.